Hi everyone, this is Ankur Joshi. I'm the founder and CEO of Nuclei. We are a FinTech based in India. We work with multiple banks. We work with banks across Middle East, Southeast Asia, South Asia, and help integrate our products and deliver great customer experiences to banks' customers. In our podcast, we try and bring leaders across the banking industry, across geographies, and delve deeper into their personal stories, delve deeper into how has their career path been, what have they achieved over the last few years, few journeys, and figure out what can and what have they learned over the years, what has been their leadership style, etc. Right. Today, it's my pleasure to have Niven, who is a digital banking officer at Banque Saudi Fransi, and he leads their digital initiatives. And Grant, thank you so much for coming to the podcast. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Ankur. Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Awesome, Grant. So let me first begin with this question. You have been across multiple geographies. You have worked across multiple sectors, and that's something which we rarely see in the banking industry, right? You have been part of the financial ecosystem for a long time, but you have very recently joined a bank and gone on to the other side, right? But before we delve into that, let's go back many years and understand how you were through your growth years. What were your formative years? Where did you grow up? What were key learning? If you can just explain some of the key incidents from your growth years, how they shaped you, what are the value systems that got developed, right? It will be really interesting to know.
Sure. So well, delving into the distant past. So I was originally born in Scotland. So I'm a UK national, Scot at heart. Family from a very working class background. So my father and his brothers, my mother and her siblings, they all grew up in the north of Scotland. And actually, in my early years, my father qualified as an architect, and I think this is a little bit about this travel bug that hit me. It was in his life as well, and in his year where he studied in profession, in his architectural certification and degree, he actually went to do voluntary services overseas in Kenya, in Mombasa, and this was in the early 70s. And I think that gave him an opportunity to see beyond Scotland, beyond the UK, how you could contribute and participate and also learn and engage with different cultures, which actually led to when I popped out into this world, we went from a very young age, 1 year old. My father actually, with that bug, got an opportunity to move to Qatar in Doha. So in the mid 70s, where I started my life, I had a wonderful opportunity to see the Middle East region, grew up there for a good 8-9 years, and then with that, get exposure to very diverse both cultures, ethnic groups, and indeed in the formative years as a child, an opportunity to travel, which has been something that's been constant throughout my life since then. So from that point, we eventually moved back to the United Kingdom. My father set up his own business. I went into education, went through an interesting journey, living in the Middle East in Doha to moving to a small rural school in the northeast of England, which was predominantly made up of farmers' children and people who were used to literally coming from that area. So it was a shock to them and to me in terms of that first period. And when you talk about your first hardships, I struggled as a younger child in that environment. I was from a very international, open mindset, and I was brought into a very rural, closed mindset. And I think that was probably the first checkpoint for me, where I discovered that I needed to control my energy, my voice from that young age, because I fought back, and it didn't go down too well with the authorities at the school. So bar nearly being banished from the school, I was given another chance, and I was actually put into a schooling environment where there was a much more international background, and that's where I kind of started to fly a bit more. I was in education, but making friends with people who were from all kinds of different backgrounds. And that then led me into going through a journey where ultimately I ended up going back to Scotland from the northeast of England, studied at Strathclyde University, where I started off doing economics, business, law, various different topics, thinking I'd go into a profession where I'd find myself a professional, like my father, like an architect, but actually did not like any of those things, but was in particular love with human geography. And this is a banker who works in technology. That's where I started, a human geographer. But I think a lot of that was down to the fact that I love travel, I love people, I love culture, and I love seeing the impact of human beings on the world. And my favorite read, even in those younger days, and when I was at university, was the National Geographic. That for me was like a window into the world in terms of how people and nature and other kind of organisms in this planet all operate, right? And I think that's one fascination I've had, is how that engagement happens, and the good and the bad in terms of that. And with that, I found myself over a number of years kind of moving through my university education, actually finding that I loved interacting with people. And that was one of my biggest strengths, so to speak, is being able to communicate, being able to get empathy, being able to engage with people, being able to understand different perspectives. And then when I finished my degree, when it came to a decision point as to what do I do with my career, I think the ideal would be I would have gone into being a National Geographic photographer or a travel journalist, but it wasn't gonna give me probably enough financially to keep me going, or I didn't have any experience to do it. And I actually saw an advert in the in one of the, it was the actual Financial Times, and there was also a similar advert in the Times newspaper over that period, and it was the time before kind of mass internet, but it was a period where you had to apply for a job and get into a profession. And it was actually one thing I always loved was technology, even though I wasn't a coder, I wasn't an engineer, a technologist, a software developer, but I loved the promise it had around changing the way we all interact and engage. So I actually applied and was successful to get on a course for 6 weeks with Computer Associates, the US-based software company at the time. And that was my entry point into, I guess, the career I'm in now, which has gone through various different kind of twists and turns. But that 6-week period was it was in effect an elongated interview. There was no promise of a job at the end of it, but I think that's probably the first trait that I've had. I like taking risks. For me, it was, I've got nothing to lose. I need a job. I'm gonna go for this. So in I went, and I did a 6-week program where I was kind of taught the basics of the technology industry, how to dress, how to present, how to engage, how to look at financials and commercials, how to kind of get empathy with people when you're in a business situation. And that just made me alive. I found a calling where I thought, I love this. This is a great opportunity, not only to get into the technology industry, but also actually in an area that I'm quite comfortable with from a personal perspective. So I'm a big believer in follow where your heart is, where and where you feel that you're going to really enjoy and thrive, and then that will ride you through all kinds of different things, good and bad. And that led me into, I guess, the technology path that I'm on just now.
Okay. So just double clicking on the part about you having experienced a lot of diverse cultures during, maybe before you were like 17, 18 years of age, right? Having spent time in Middle East, northeast of England, then also in Scotland, like, and those two are also very, very different cultures, right? Northeast is very different to the Scottish culture. Like, let me know if I'm getting that correct. Having spent or experienced those diverse cultures, essentially it makes you a good problem solver. It makes you very comfortable in uncomfortable situations. It makes you accept that even if you are put into a new situation, you're going to adapt, right? That adaptation automatically comes. And you spoke about being very, very interested in National Geographic. That adaptation, that natural way to pick up new things, solve a particular problem, even if it's a problem which I've never faced before, right? And that's quite honestly is something which we also see in your overall career over the last 2 decades or so, that you have had a diverse career there as well, right? So it's not that you didn't want yourself to be pigeonholed into a particular role. You just went from solving a problem to the next problem to the next. Is that something which I'm getting correctly?
Yeah, I think it's in my personal life and in my work life, as you travel down that road and you get those experiences and you get to taste different things, be it from a business or a personal perspective, you then kind of follow that direction because you enjoy it. And I think that's probably the biggest thing that I've done. I've usually followed what I enjoy. And I think if I look back to those younger years, what it did do was make me open-minded. I think you're right with that statement. I didn't actually know this until later, but as you go through kind of beyond academic into your professional life, you often, if you're working for large corporates, you go through all kinds of professional training. You get various different personality tests. You go, and there's all kinds of different ones out there. But one thing that's been constant is versatility. So I'm highly adaptable in a lot of those kind of scales that they have. I adapt to the situation. I don't know if I'm quite a chameleon because I'm not molding myself to something that isn't me, but I'm quite interested with the challenge. So if it's it doesn't always succeed. I think is the biggest thing is in that you often hit a brick wall, you have a failure, but I think the biggest thing is you're prepared to get back up and go at it again.
Yeah,
that's the most important.
Yeah. You also spoke about risk. So what's been your relationship with risk taking? I mean, in general, a lot of people preach to avoid risks, to reduce risk. You spoke about that you are very comfortable with taking risks. How did that become part of your personality?
I think risk is something which we all live with every day. I think it's how you weigh up the situation as well. So I think as you go through life, you become more informed. And one thing that I didn't think I did a lot when I was in my earlier career was research enough. I followed the gut. So for me, the gut was, I'm going to do this. And the science behind it, be it in terms of doing full research or kind of getting sort of a 360 view from different sources, wasn't often there. I'd literally just throw myself into that situation. So that first kind of application into a 6-week program with Computer Associates, which brought me down a certain path, was from the gut. I just thought, I'm going to go for this. I think as you go through life, though, you start becoming, with your trials and tribulations, your learnings, your network, your experience, your reading, and your education. One thing I've always done is try to continually keep learning, and that's something which, if you do it in the right way, it keeps you alive as well. That all informs risk taking. So you maybe it's subconscious, but you start becoming more and more informed in terms of what is a good or a bad decision. But I think one of the key things is actually listening to your broader kind of network and also all those experiences you've got, and really taking a breath, pausing, listening to it in your mind as well as in terms of discussions you might have before you then throw yourself at it. And then as your career goes forward, as you get more and more responsibility, those risks can actually have significant effects on not only yourself but other people and organizations. So therefore, you need to be more measured in terms of how you do it. So that knee-jerk response, just following the gut all the time, that's sometimes the last question I'll ask is what's the gut saying to this? Once the mind's thought it all through, but the mind needs to kind of kick in as a first checkpoint before you kind of go down that. Certainly at this point, I am in my career just now.
Correct. Not all risks work out, right? A lot of times, you have a lot of failures, right? Is there any favorite failure of yours which you can highlight? Maybe which taught you a lot of things?
Favorite failure. I think a lot of it's, for me, it's around, I'm a big people person, which is kind of one constant thread throughout my various different roles. Is I've had to lead and empower and work with teams of people to deliver ultimately the end product and services that the various different organizations, including at the bank, that we serve our end customers with. And I think probably one of my biggest fears of failure, and in some cases has turned into reality, is how I can look after people. So I had one particular incident where I went through a personal, what I thought was a positive, when I worked for an organisation, Logica. We were acquired by an organisation, CGI, a big Canadian outsourcer, very successful company, and I was leading a regional team for Logica, which was at that time probably the last publicly listed large kind of systems integrator outsourcer that was headquartered in the UK. I was very proud of that, working with a almost kind of a homegrown company, and I had a long successful history. But as part of that, when we got acquired, a lot of the top management from Logica left. And the next layer, and I was in that position where I was the new blood. The CGI team saw me as an opportunity to come in, and very quickly got interviewed and given a director position, P&L responsibility, grand kind of remit in terms of my breadth of role. And I thought, this is great. I've made it. I've made it into the new organization, and hopefully this is going to be the next big step in my own career chapter. But I guess the biggest failure I felt was I failed my team in Logica as part of that, because as part of that process, and some of this stuff's out of your hands, I was asked to apply the template of CGI, the business model. And that was very much at odds with the business that we ran in Logica, which actually led to me having to make redundant a large proportion of my own team, which was a failure of sorts, because I felt I was letting people down, but I was actually just following the corporate culture. I was following the corporate mandate. And but I personally felt very deflated at that. The relationships I'd built, the trust I'd built amongst all the people I worked closely with, colleagues as well as staff who fed into my teams. And then having to go through those one-to-one discussions with people and explain the model doesn't fit, you're a great person and you can have all kinds of opportunity out there, but not being able to kind of then help them really kind of secure their role. It was a fait accompli, as they say. It's just finished. And that for me was something where I thought, I'm following my own career path here, thinking I'm doing great things, but actually I feel that I'm letting others down. So that for me is a failure, because I've failed the people that I work with. And I think that's one thing I've always looked at when I'm moving through an organization, is my growth is one thing, but what impact's that having on others? And I think that's something I've then measured into other roles I've had, and I've managed much more carefully in terms of one, how I communicate, but also those steps that can happen. Thankfully, a lot of those people have grown and had amazing opportunities, and that's the other thing. In adversity, often great things come. So, and that's another thing I've seen throughout my own career. In the toughest times that you go through, usually at the back end of it, the greatest opportunities come, because you throw yourself at things, you open your mind, you engage, and actually when you stretch yourself and you go into a kind of new frontier, often those things that you never thought were there do exist, and you get exposure to it. And that's often what people find, I've found in my life so far, in those kind of tough career situations for employees and staff and yourself. When you pop out the other end, it's often brighter. So that sort of, and that's the optimistic side coming out of me as well. But I think that's also the important thing, is that people remember that when they're going through difficult periods.
No, but Grant, thank you so much for sharing that. I know it is extremely difficult. I understand the situation, having been through such situations previously. And it's very courageous of you to share that openly. I know how tough it would. I mean, of course, it is tough for a lot of people who are being made redundant, but as a leader who needs to go and execute that, it is also tough on them, right? And emotionally a lot more, because you carry that burden. I can see in your face that you're still carrying that burden till maybe around 10 years later, right? So, but it shapes you as a leader.
By people, I still get reminded by some of my team at the time. Remember that discussion we had? But they're also reminded, well, if that wasn't for that discussion, you wouldn't be in the place you are now, which is a good position.
Correct. So, but it shapes you as a leader, right? And it teaches you things which you should be doing, but also things which you should not be doing, and the way you lead people. Thank you so much for sharing that. Now, coming back to your stint from Logica, you moved to EY, right? Can you tell us why that move happened, how that move happened, and going into consulting and then coming into a bank? That's also very interesting.
Actually, I'll rewind a little bit, because probably before I joined Logica, the happiest time I think to this day I've ever had in my career journey was after I left Computer Associates, where I had a fairly short tenure, but again, that was it was hard yards in terms of engaging with almost like a new industry and having to learn how to deliver yourself in a professional environment. But I left Computer Associates after a couple of years and went into at the time, and it no longer exists, but at the time it was one of the kind of rising stars of the UK technology industry, and it was a company called Morse. And I was actually there for 10 years, which is a long chunk of time for someone young in their career. But that was an environment where we were working in the technology domain. It was predominantly around data centers and high-end Unix systems, storage. But my career evolved with that organization. And that's where one of those things that led me into the consulting side and now working for a bank, where that came from. And it was, if you're in a commercial role in your career and you're selling things, doesn't matter what it is. It could be services, technology, it could be in other industries, kind of telco equipment, it could be media space, advertising, property, it doesn't matter. If you sell something and that product isn't good quality, people aren't going to buy it from you again. And that was the big learning I had over that period. Is we were great at kind of working in reselling other organizations' great technology. But then increasingly, we started as an organization when I was at Morse, what I call plumbing it all together. And we were building at the time in the kind of late 90s going into early 2000s, in the dot-com boom period. Y2K was there, and lots of kind of fear and doubt as to what was going to happen. Was it going to be Armageddon and the world would stop after the year 2000 and the clocks changed? That whole period, we increasingly started deploying large teams of people, engineers predominantly, but other technologists, project managers, to actually get all this technology working. And that's where I kind of moved into the world of people and services. But increasingly, you discovered that if you couldn't deliver on your promises, and this is one of my personal mantras, always deliver on your promises. Never overcommit something that you genuinely can't do. And that's the path that I started going down, which ultimately led me into more of the consulting and execution advisory space, because I became very deeply ingrained in not just promoting and selling a product, but actually making it happen and making that product a success for the organization I was working with. So that 10-year period was a great learning exercise, because some of the projects we didn't deliver, which made you really wake up and work out why not and how could you fix it. And then you'd work with, at the time, predominantly banks, which has led me into the financial services space. I worked with some of the biggest banks in Europe at the time, making the whole kind of technology domain work for them and trying to solve problems around how they were delivering technology to the business. So that whole period, delivering on your promises, really getting close to how do things kind of deliver successfully, that for me is at the nub of it. That's so important in many people's careers. And those that don't get it right are the ones that are not delivering on that commitment. So that led to a desire to move into the consulting space. And I think so that was the rewind. Sort of the fast forward is when I left CGI, predominantly that was through relationships, and that's another big thing in my career. I've often followed people that I respect. So if I've had a leader myself who I've really respected, there's been empathy there. I've valued their guidance in my career. I've often, when they've called, if the right opportunity is there, I've gone with them. So it was actually one of our managing directors at the time from former Logica who joined EY. And that was my opportunity to go back to the Middle East region. So at the time, and I still do, have a house in Edinburgh. So we're back in the heartland of where I was from originally. But I found the transition from working in a large kind of outsourcing company like CGI to moving into kind of Big Four consulting, that was a great, again, opportunity for me. It was a stretch yourself, go and learn, and actually an opportunity to move back to the Middle East region. So it was 2013. I kind of through working with one of my old bosses, a guy called Chris Gant, great guy. I got the opportunity to join the EY Middle East Partnership, where I joined as a director. And again, that was, for me, it was a great chance to come back to the Middle East region. After growing up here as a younger boy, it was a chance to come here and really, I guess, cut my cloth in a professional capacity. And that, what a great opportunity that was as well, because I spent six and a half years working with some of the biggest financial institutions predominantly. So I worked in the financial services, again, domain throughout that period, be it central banks or the regulators. I actually was, and this was probably the first time I actually moved from being a consultative professional into working client side. Within a few months of being in the region, I was asked to go and work with one of the largest sovereign wealth funds in the world. So they were going through a big operation transformation at the time. This is Abu Dhabi Investment Authority. And so again, I was in the deep end, out of my comfort zone, but I was asked to go and meet up with one of the heads of their probably largest their real estate fund, which is, I think, the largest real estate fund in the world. And they were totally transforming all their technology and operating model. And they wanted someone to come in and oversee it, which was, at the time for me, quite daunting. But I guess with life experiences and some of those basic principles, you think, why not? I'll go and have the conversation. And after quite a long session with them, a few hours later, I got a handshake and they wanted me to come back the next week. And I ended up being there for a year and a half. So I didn't escape. So EY put me out on full secondment, and into that place I went, with all kinds of different initiatives running, which was great. And I think that gave me the taste for actually working in a client environment is as enriching as it can be working in a kind of consulting technology services environment. So yeah, that was a very interesting move. Certainly something I didn't expect to do.
Well, that certainly is very interesting, and specifically like 3 months after moving into Dubai, you were thrown into that secondment, right? So going into that, having probably spent 6.5 years at EY, then taking that decision to move to actually a bank. One, why did you take that decision? What was the thought process, thinking behind it? Two, how has been faring? Like, what are the key challenges that you have faced, which let me put you on the spot, you were not expecting to face in a bank?
Well, there's a few of them, I'll be honest. So I think the transition from an EY to a large regional bank. So I think the again, relationships took me in a certain direction. So and it was a big decision for me. So I'd actually got through my EY career, and I'd moved into a partnership role where I was accountable for a large team of people working across the whole Middle East region around technology and digital in financial services. But I'll be honest, I found myself on a plane every week dipping into things versus getting immersed. And that was kind of, I was accountable for lots of different client jobs, from Egypt right way through the GCC. Quite a diverse team of people, lots of various different initiatives running, but it wasn't really setting my fire alight, I'll be honest. I think I'd reached the point where I wanted to do something fresh and new. And I was actually looking at what do I do next around that. And that was the time I got in a discussion with actually one of our former clients, a gentleman called Mike Cunningham, who reached out. And I'd always said to him, wouldn't it be great to build a digital bank? Wouldn't it be great to be involved in that from the get-go and actually work through that process? And he actually I got a WhatsApp message one day when I was at EY just saying, Grant, do you fancy building a digital bank? And that was it, exclamation mark. And I was like, oh, it's interesting. So we had a conversation, and then that led to a few other things. And then what really appealed with the role I'm in now was actually coming into the oldest bank in Saudi Arabia, as is now. So BSF, Banque Saudi Fransi, was founded in 1977 with various different mergers, acquisitions that happened in Saudi. That now makes BSF the oldest bank that's publicly listed here on the Saudi Stock Exchange. But as part of that, it was in need of a major investment in terms of building out its overall strategy, so it could set itself up for its future growth, but also around how it leveraged technology and digital to deliver great customer experience. And that for me was again another one of those. This is not going to be easy, but actually what a great opportunity to come in and be part of something. So what's been really interesting for me is coming into an organization where we've kind of defined the strategy and actually did this in the middle of COVID. So I left EY in the February of 2020, just as COVID hit the world by force. And then in 2020 March, joined the bank. So what an interesting time to commence on a new career path. So we were all in quarantine. I was stuck in Abu Dhabi, couldn't fly to Riyadh. At the time, I managed to get a Mac shipped to me. So that arrived, and that was my tools to basically craft the start of my BSF career, sitting in my apartment in Abu Dhabi for 8 months remote, a lot of which was spent in lockdown. But over that period, it was amazing what you can do in the middle of adversity when everyone else is in the same position. So this was an organization that was very used to doing things in person, that had to respond very quickly and allow remote working. So the business operations side had to kick in. And then for someone like me to come in and then build relationships and empathy and get a deep understanding of a very traditional Saudi-based organization, and then work to develop a strategy around how we were going to really transform and be a digital go-to bank within a 3-year period, that was all quite daunting at the time, sitting in an apartment with no physical contact with anyone. But we managed to do it. We rallied through kind of executive support. The CEO was very, very supportive, along with a lot of the leadership team. And we brought together, with a bit of support around facilitation from another one of the big 4 partners who helped us kind of do virtual facilitation. We brought everyone together across all the business lines, the control functions, the operations and technology team. And we, over a 4 to 5 month period, developed a really rock solid strategy for the bank around new ventures, how to transform existing business, and how to put the customer at the center of everything we wanted to do through digital. So that was the kind of punch in the face at the time, but actually one of the most rewarding things that I think we've done so far is actually going through that period and then actually building lots of great relationships with people virtually, and then meeting them all face to face when the borders opened again. Because obviously Saudi was closed for a long time, so there was no flying in and out. And it was, what a happy time that was, actually coming into the head office and meeting all the teams when things did kick off and we could get through the airports. And then that's led to quite a very ambitious transformation plan. So we're launching digital ventures. We're in production, friends and family with our Neobank. I'll be honest, we wanted it to go a lot quicker, and there's been challenges around regulatory approvals, integrations to legacy technology, which you never should do when you're launching a neobank. I will reiterate this to anyone who ever tries it. Never integrate a legacy organization to a speedboat. So, and this is one learning we're trying to get past. But also we've looked at new business models as part of this. So we're about to launch the first bank as a service partnerships with FinTechs into Saudi Arabia. So we're powering FinTechs through our regulatory license into the kingdom, and enabling a lot of our services through APIs to help them on that journey, and then actually co-invest and we equally get returns around the revenue streams that flow out of that. So those global FinTechs who want to enter, it's a great opportunity to partner with the bank. We've also been very busy working with all our business lines. So we've developed a lot of kind of new programs that are going to, in effect, reinvent how we are engaging with customers through digital channels. So be that through our retail business, mobile banking and internet banking, totally re-platforming and creating a great experience for customers. We're also working with a lot of our corporate clients, which again is giving me more exposure into different areas to a deeper extent. And that's back to the point I made around, often when you're working for a large organization like EY, you engage with lots of different organizations. You have lots of exposure to things, but you don't go deep with one particular organization for a more sustained period of time. And that's the opportunity I've had here. Built amazing teams. So back to the people piece. So I think I started off with 4 people in group digital, and now we're in the hundreds. And we've built great capability for the bank, but also industry-leading capability, engineering, product, UX, UI design, data science. These are all the lifeblood of digital organizations, and these are all things that we had to establish from the get-go. And actually getting access to talent is a challenge at times in those areas, especially in Saudi Arabia. But we've found ways and means to build it and attract. And again, that's another hugely rewarding part of this sort of role, is seeing that go from humble beginnings and very small to scaling significantly, so that you can actually then execute on the vision that you have. And that's again back to the original point I made around what makes you get out of bed in the morning, is actually being able to deliver on those commitments. And still some way to go on it, believe me. There's a lot to do, but we're starting to see that all play out now, several years in.
Awesome. Dan, thank you so much. Like, it's been lovely listening to your journey. It's very insightful and very exciting. I'm really sure that you must be very excited along with your team about what you are building at BSF. Before we close, one last question. What has been the kindest thing that anyone has ever done for you?
The kindest thing, I would have to say it's probably my wife marrying me. And in all sincerity, I think she's the one who saved me throughout a lot of the highs and lows in this life we all lead. I think everyone needs someone that's your confidant, that you can stick with, that's there through the good and the bad times. And I think the kindest thing she did to me was kind of, I guess, open her heart to me in the first place. But actually, that's given me the courage to kind of keep going. So I think that for me that's one of the most the happiest things that's ever happened to me.
That's a beautiful answer. Grant. Thank you so much for coming onto the podcast. Really appreciate it, and best of luck for all the initiatives that you are taking up at BSF. Thank you so much.
Yeah, pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.